Welcome, zombie fans, to this week's episode of Reanimated. I am H.A. Conrad, here with my intrepid co-host, as always, Stuart Tiffin.
Yeah.
Yep, we're on episode 95, and today we are talking about episodes 3 and 4 of The Walking Dead Season 4. But before we get started with our little pieces of undead news and that review, just wanted to throw a shout out to Squarespace. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring our show. And for all you fans, if you haven't used Squarespace before, it's the all-in-one platform. You can make your own website with it, customize it, build it beautiful. It's pretty amazing. We use it for Reanimated. We encourage you to use it as well. If you want to try it out, there's an offer code for first-time users, zombie, not case sensitive, throw it in there, and you'll receive 10% off your purchase. So thanks again, Squarespace, for your support. So, Mr. Tiffin, how are you this fine day?
I am dandy, thank you.
I went up to get my coffee this morning, and the headline of, I think it was the New York Post, was "Big Swinging Dixie," with Donald Trump on the cover.
Well, that's a fun thing to wake up to.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah, so that's going on. But yeah, all very exciting.
Okay. What else do you want to talk about today?
Well, other more interesting things to talk about. As you know, our gentleman who had the zombie nativity scene has been in court. He was fighting a pretty steep fine for it was for building. What did they say? It was. They said that the zombie nativity was violating zoning laws and things like that. So they were trying to slap him with a pretty huge fine. But really, it's because he had a zombie nativity scene up. But they actually. He actually won, and so no longer has to do that. And in response to that, I don't even know what, but now the little baby Jesus zombie is up for sale on eBay, I believe.
Yeah. What was the bid up to? Last I looked, it was like 520,
Yep.
$510. I mean, he had said that this was going to be his last year. I think he's been doing it for 8 or so years. He's probably just selling off all those assets.
Yep.
Since he's made something of a name for himself, in at least around Ohio.
Right.
Um, yeah, might as well just get out while the getting's good, since the
Yeah,
case got
it
dropped.
sounds like that, definitely.
Otherwise, he could be facing $30,000 in permitting charges again next year, maybe.
Right. So I'm glad that they dropped the case against him. Glad that he's hopefully capitalizing upon his fame for the moment. Um, but I am glad to see that the result was actually good in this case. But in other news, the Fear the Walking Dead teaser.
Oh
What did
yeah,
you think?
yeah. It dropped like a week ago, I guess. It's very short, right? It's
I
only a
know.
few seconds, and it's got some interesting imagery stuff where The Walking Dead hasn't really tread before, but where the title, not the title credit, but the after credit scenes from Dawn of the Dead 2004 certainly have tread here,
Mm-hmm.
which is surviving on a boat.
Yep.
And
So
yeah, so
so the,
it's
I think that's enough of a teaser to get people kind of interested about that scenario, and we haven't actually seen too much of that other than in that particular film.
yeah, and in that film it was just like snippets, right?
Right.
Weren't even sure what was going on half the time.
Yep. Well, I think we were pretty sure what was going on, and it wasn't
At
good.
the very end, it was not good at all. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, this actually piqued my interest, so I'm curious to see what they do with it. Hopefully, I'll like this a lot more than the first season of the show. Um, but then in other news, so in Collywood, which is apparently the Chennai region of India, there haven't been like a ton of horror films. And recently there's been a few that have come out, mainly ghost stories. And apparently there's a new film called Maruthan, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. And it's getting pretty good reviews, so I'm curious. I'd be willing to take a peek at it.
So is there dancing?
What? I don't know, but I think it's probably a B horror film, and it to me it's always kind of interesting to see what zombie films come from other cultures. I mean, we've seen quite a few out of France. We've seen obviously if from is it the Norway where the Nazi zombies was? Dead
Dead Snow,
Snow.
yeah.
Yep.
I think that was.
So it's all, I always like to see different cultures take on it because I think it's really interesting. And Japan, of course, has its own special flavor.
Mm-hmm.
But so I'm curious to see what this does. It's getting decent reviews. Hard to tell where it'll go and if it'll be my taste, but I'm willing to give it a shot.
Well, there's a couple. This article also that we'll have in the show notes also refers to a couple of other so they're calling significantly successful zombie films like Go Goa Gone, which I
Yes, which I've never
actually
heard of
love that
either.
title. I would be interested in checking out some of these for sure.
Right, and I suspect perhaps there is music in this because in some of the other ones there apparently have been like dancing scenes and such. So this could be interesting.
Just the cover shot looks like this guy's about to start dancing.
It
Honestly,
does, and I think that alone makes it worth us checking it out. So
it's something.
let's
It's ground we have not yet tread. So yes,
well maybe we should put this, on our list of things and see what happens.
mm-hmm, definitely.
All right. And then lastly, just as a like interesting, not interesting even, but El Chapo has been
Famous Mexican drug lord.
right has been claiming that, and his lawyers have been claiming that he's being made into a zombie because of lack of sleep, like because obviously he escaped through a tunnel through which people like it wasn't just that he escaped through a tunnel, it was that a tunnel was built with lighting and like air conditioning. And so they're basically having him under 24-hour surveillance, and he's not sleeping, and he's very unhappy about that.
They do
So,
a bed check, yeah, every 2 hours.
yeah. So anyway,
It's rough.
we'll see if he actually becomes a zombie, but for the moment, I think it's just lack of sleep. But so I'm pretty excited to talk about the two episodes we're talking about today. I've been enjoying watching this season, and this was sort of the point in the season. Like after watching these two episodes, I wanted to binge watch the entire rest of the season
Yeah.
because it reminded me of some other things that happened. So
Tell you what, I'd rather be watching season 4 than season 6.
yeah, I know. So in any case, without further ado, let's talk about episode 3 and 4 of The Walking Dead season 4. So first up is Isolation, directed by Dan Sackheim, and this one was written by Robert Kirkman.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. He tends to write really big set pieces, but I think it was probably the Tyrese stuff that he wanted to write in this
Right,
one.
right, which is
I
interesting. And just to remind our listeners what's going on in the prison, there has been an outbreak of the flu, basically it seems like a pretty terrible version of it. And at the end of the previous episode, Tyrese discovered the burned bodies of Karen. And sorry, I can't remember the other person.
David from Decatur.
Yes, David from Decatur. And it was clear that they had been dragged there, that there was a blood trail. So it was pretty horrible. And there's just this very... I feel like this is sort of we had this very idyllic beginning of this season, just where they're like farming and they feel like they found an equilibrium. They're getting a little bit of, I don't want to say civility, but that's kind of what's going on in the prison. Like there's some safety or whatever. And this particular incident is just sort of like, okay, well, things have just gone to hell in the handbasket on many levels. So, and this becomes a central theme throughout this particular season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to turn down the thermostat from my phone, which works, by the way.
Cool.
So, I agree. We have definitely fallen off that delicate edge of civility. Although one constant forever is that Daryl will lick his hand in every episode of this
Yeah,
season.
he really likes licking his hand right now. I don't know why.
It's just, it's continuity. We've got to have something to keep us, to remind us that there's a deadly disease going around. And the thing that reminds us of that is Daryl's terrible hygiene.
Well, and I have to say, as you know, I was getting over either a cold or flu like this past week, and so watching these episodes, just maybe not the best for my mental state.
And
'Cause-
speaking of delicate mental states, that that's a good segue to the
yes,
beginning of this episode where we kind of pick right up where we left off. Well, I guess except that now Rick and Carol and Daryl are all there with Tyrese in the small
yeah,
courtyard where the two bodies are. They're still smoking, and Tyrese is not in a good way.
nope, nope. But neither is Rick.
Eventually, no. I mean, yeah, like Rick is holding on, but then he gets punched twice in the face and
That
goes.
just throws him over the edge.
He goes into Hulk mode,
Yep,
and it does seem a little bit far fetched.
it
But
does. I
at the same
just
time, like, some critics are saying this is just to remind us of the delicate, the fragile, veneer of civility over the emotional turmoil that all these people are feeling.
hmm.
Sure, okay, but at the same time, why isn't everybody just fighting each other all the time then?
Yeah. And then there's other, I mean, and basically there, Tyrese is like, we need to find out who did this. And he just kind of freaks out on everybody, not just Rick, but on Daryl
Hmm.
and Carol and Rick. And there's this level of things going on, but there's also the bigger issue, which is that clearly there is an epidemic that's very like just it's catchy. And so they have a quarantine set up in the prison. So there's that level of, I would say, mental fragility because what that does to the rest of the people. Because Glenn gets it. Maggie,
Sasha.
yeah, Sasha, Tyrese's sister, and also the doctor has been, such a great boon to have with this whole community. He now is down with it too. So there's like the thing about like the whole thing with Tyrese is like, yes, I understand why he's upset. Of course he's upset, and of course he wants to find this out. But it feels like there's like much bigger fish to fry. And then the other thing which didn't sit totally well with me in this is that they're all talking about going out to get medicine. Well, if it's the flu, nothing actually really helps with that. I mean, other than sort of managing the symptoms, which maybe is what they're talking about. But
Hmm.
antibiotics is not going to help here, and Herschel should know that, as should the doctor. So it's almost like a wait and see kind of a situation, but maybe they feel more powerful going and doing that.
Oh, I had not put that together. Maybe they're just having the same old mindset of give a prophylactic course of broad spectrum antibiotics for everything, and that'll solve all of our problems. It's probably how they
Right.
got the zombie plague in the first place.
Right. So that was a little strange to me, just sort of as because they're obviously going to go on a supply run. Their target is this veterinary like college nearby, but
Not
that
nearby. It's
also
50 miles away.
well nearby in terms of like the nearest by that they can get, I guess, where they think is going to still have supplies.
Yeah.
But this sets up the whole gets characters out of the prison. There's all of that going on.
So this
So
this whole hospital sick base scenario is like the most terrifying
yeah,
convalescence you've ever imagined. Where when Sasha's walking in there and she just sees people spitting up blood, and she's like calling for the doctor and he's not responding, and then there's a fucking zombie in one of the
right.
cells. I'm just like, wow, this is the worst place to have the flu. Like you already feel like shit,
Yeah.
and now you basically have to not stand too close to any of the cells. Make sure you're locking the people in their cells after they're if they're too far gone. It's
Right.
pretty ugly. And then they just keep shoehorning more people in there
Right.
as the episode goes along, and there's nobody until Herschel makes his decision. There's nobody in there who's kind of remotely healthy.
Right. And then, but this whole scenario, I think, you're basically checking in with each of the main characters, sort of the characters that we want to see about. So we check in with Beth, who's being stoic and like, we have to do whatever we have to do, and Maggie and Herschel, and Herschel's of course doing the selfless thing, and he's, he's certainly the moral compass, or at least the old moral compass of this group.
Who's the new
And
moral compass?
I guess the new moral compass, but he kind of is carrying that flag
Mm-hmm.
when other folks have not been, and he's consistently carried it. But he basically tells Maggie, and she's tearfully, begging him not to go in, that he really has to do whatever he has to do because that's the right thing to do. So basically his idea is to give them elderberry tea, which I didn't know. I just kept thinking about Monty Python when he kept talking about elderberries, but that's just me.
Because your father smelled the elderberries?
Yes, yes. Exactly.
Okay. Fair enough.
But then we see other dynamics. We get to hear a little bit more from Michonne when she's talking to Daryl about her revenge quest about the governor.
Yeah, we also get to hear we get to see Carol have some feelings. These two episodes are actually full of Carol having feelings.
Yes,
When
Carol has a lot of interesting feelings.
we kind of start thinking that, and certainly, post season 4, Carol doesn't have feelings. Carol's a robot.
Hmm.
So it's kind of interesting to see her she has an emotional reaction in a couple of episodes, in both of these episodes. This in the episode 4 that we're going to talk about, she's straight up crying. And in this one, she knocks over the precious water supply
Hmm.
out of rage/accidentally. It's kind of weird.
Yep.
So when Lizzie comes down with it, even though I can't look at that girl and not cringe,
I know.
she's like, "Oh, I've got it," and Carol's like, "Oh no, you'll be fine. Get in there with the rest of the sickies." But
Right,
she
but
definitely has a
even
reaction.
even that interaction between Carol and Lizzie is super creepy. I mean, she's already being super creepy.
I think that girl's a pretty good actor, though.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, she does a great job at playing that role. But yes, I agree with you. I can't look at her without going, ugh. Um, so no, and you're right. Carol does show reactions, which I guess is good because then the big reveal, especially at the end of this episode, shows you what she's struggling with.
yeah, yeah. The what did you think of the treatment of? There's not a lot of zombies in this episode, but they go except for here and there. But when Carl and Herschel are out in the woods picking berries, and they come across two zombies in the wild and don't kill either of them, did you think that that was significant in any way?
Well, I mean, I think Carl, because of the little sociopath he was becoming, that's part of what's going on here. And it's also, I think that this group is having to make decisions about what resources to use. So if you can easily get away from them without actually having a confrontation, because any confrontation is going to have some danger, right?
Hmm.
And I think in this case, Herschel's just like, you know, basically, let's not waste our energy here, and tells Carl it's just not necessary. So I think that this is, again, showing Herschel as a bit of the moral compass, and he's just worried about Carl. And Carl listens.
Yeah, and that's impressive that he doesn't. But I mean, it's pretty clear that neither of those zombies are going to catch them.
Right.
Even the one who's on both of its feet is got a bear trap stuck to it. So it's
And is
incredible that it
moving.
got that close to them without them
Right.
hearing it. But they can easily just walk away. And I thought that was, you know, an interesting turn, especially since it was Herschel and Carl who were together when Carl shot the kid at the season 3 finale.
Right. And I think that's kind of the point, or I
Yeah,
think that's part of why we saw this.
it's like they're getting over their whatever distrust they might have had, or yeah, like Carl's gonna be cool again with Herschel after this.
Right. Um, so there was that. And then I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the Tyrese character and how the treatment of his character just consistently irks me, especially in this episode.
It's a tough, yeah, because he's introduced as like this level-headed guy that you want to have on your team in season 3, and at this point you're like, I don't want that guy anywhere near me.
Well, right, and it's sort of like, okay, he's going to decide, and after talking to Sasha, decides to go on the supply run with Daryl and Michonne, and he just puts people in danger. I think that his reactions just feel really odd, and they
Like
feel
sitting
over.
in the car for too
Yeah,
long.
like although I have to say, so this group goes out on their run, and they almost plow right into probably one of the biggest herds we've ever seen
Hmm.
of walkers, and I it seemed a little bit contrived in how, like, because I don't believe Daryl would have been that sloppy in trying to get away from them, but his little spin out on zombie corpses
Yeah, that's
was
pretty sick.
pretty sick. But just like Tyrese is sort of like, he goes from being, okay, we're going to go and get supplies, to being this weird, sort of shell shocked person. And I'm not saying that it wouldn't happen, but everything that we've known about Tyrese from when he was, working with the governor, is that he's been this level headed person. And yes, we saw the break when he sees, when he sees the burnt corpses. And but it felt like he was, after talking to Sasha, like he had snapped out of it and was going into action mode, and then that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. He does kind of have that conversation with her, and he's like, "I'm gonna make a difference. I'm gonna go and get the medicine because that's what everybody needs." And then, yeah, once they get in the car and that thing happens, he still just sits there for way way too long, putting Bob at risk essentially.
Right.
Although Bob could have just left without him. That Bob not leaving him there it goes a long way toward undoing some of the, I don't know, actually the stuff that Bob does in episode 4. I feel like the audience is supposed to judge him, and I guess everybody's judging him for that, the alcohol stuff,
Right.
later. But in episode 3 here, he's being a real stand-up guy, it seems like, although he
Right.
really
And
really uses his gun too much.
he does, and it attracts even more people, or more walkers. And even, when they see, because Tyrese is just basically hanging out in the car, kind of gets overwhelmed, and there's no way that they're going to be able to get to him without putting themselves in danger, so they end up having to leave. And he does regroup with them later, shockingly, which seems to happen a lot with Tyrese.
Yeah, this I feel like this Kirkman writing this, this reminds me of the scene in the book where he gets locked in the gym
Yeah.
with like
Yep.
100 walker, maybe 30 walkers, and they think he's a goner, but then they open the door later and it's just him. They're surrounded by zombie corpses, and I'm pretty sure that this scene of him inside that giant group of zombies by the car is supposed to be that scene, I assume.
Agreed. Yep. I thought that too.
Yeah. So fairly improbable that he would have survived that, but okay, we'll take it. It definitely makes you again now want to have him on your team, even if he is like emotionally unstable.
Right.
Um, and the other thing that happened in the car right before that was they heard a little advertisement on the radio
Right.
for Terminus, although you
Hmm.
could barely make it out. It was pretty hard to hear, but in retrospect, there it is.
Yep. There's the first sort of beacon, basically.
Yep. And then from that end of the road trip, we go back to the prison, and Rick asks Carol if she killed Karen and David, and she says yes. Which now I have to apologize because last time we talked about The Walking Dead, I was like, "Yeah, we're breaking you this news 5 episodes early that it was Carol." No, it was just 1 episode early.
Yeah, it wasn't that early, but
In my
it
mind,
did. But you know
they
what? I
tagged
thought
it
the
out.
same thing. For some reason, I thought that they held out about this for
Yeah.
longer, and clearly they didn't.
No, apparently not. But from a couple seasons later, in my head, it was like Carol had this terrible secret for half the season. But okay,
Right.
not the case. But that's the end of Isolation. It's actually like my notes for Isolation are not super long. Even though there was a few things going on, it was mostly I feel like about the sickness and about Tyrese's mental state
Right.
and
And then, I
Carol's.
mean, the whole, you're correct. Like the whole Terminus sort of flag was there, which is the whole reason that Daryl gets a little distracted.
Yeah, of
But
course, not looking at the road. How many people have gotten into car accidents in The Walking Dead for this?
I know. But still, anyway, no, I don't want to get into it. But it seems just like a little bit of an overused trope here.
Yeah.
But that then segues. I did like the way that they ended this episode with the conversation between Rick and Carol because it's pretty simple. And it definitely leaves this. She's so matter of fact about telling Rick that she's killed Karen and David.
Which makes you wonder if anybody else had just asked her that, if what she would have said.
Right. And it sort of, to me, it's because Rick asked her that she owned up to it.
Maybe.
Because she has trust with him there. And I think feels like he'll understand that.
Like
But
if they just had an assembly of the whole prison community and been like, whoever killed Karen and David, please step forward. I wonder if she would have just been like, oh yeah, that was me.
Yep. But then that leads directly into the next episode,
Entitled
which is
Indifference?
called Indifference.
I'm not sure I understand why it's called that, but I'm sure it'll become clear in the course of our conversation.
Well, I think, again, this has a lot to do with Carol.
Director Trisha Brock, writer Matthew Negrete.
That's pretty close, I think.
Okay.
I'm not going to try, so I'm leaving it to you.
Audience 13.3 million. These episodes got... let's see. I had this up on Rotten Tomatoes earlier. Season 4. I love that every episode has its own rating.
I know.
That's kind of the best. So, Isolation had a 91, and Indifference has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes. And remember, the first two had 100 each, which is, I don't know that happens very often. Certainly has not happened in Season 6 or the rest of Season 4. Anyway, so... Well, even though these are, they're still in the 90s, they're still super well critically received. So, Indifference, what all happens?
Right. So, despite some of I felt a little bit of the artificial setup to get these people outside of the prison, it is nice to see an episode not in the prison.
Yeah, except the intro is still in the prison because Carol and Rick are, like, getting their road trip together.
No, I mean it is, but like the main part of this episode is outside.
True.
So you've got the supply run with Daryl and Michonne and Tyrese and what's his face that I always forget his name, Bob. And then Rick and Carol go off to do another supply run.
Which seems just really to be a... Who's left at the prison? Just Maggie?
Maggie,
Who's
Herschel.
the healthy person left at the prison?
Just Maggie, pretty much.
Maggie.
Well, Herschel,
And
sort of.
Beth and Judith are in isolation, and Carl is apparently like locked up somewhere too now. It's... I don't know. Like, the weird thing about this is you have to assume that there are other healthy people in this community.
Right.
But I don't know. Maybe it's just like a budget thing. They can't show more actors. Don't you think?
Well, maybe it's also because the audience really wants to see these main actors, so maybe it's also a way to focus on them.
Just some set dressing, just like a couple of other people out there would be interesting.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. So Lizzie is talking to Carol about how it's not so bad to be a zombie because then you at least get to still be something, and all the alarm bells are still ringing.
Yeah, Lucy just gets creepier and creepier every interaction you see.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll leave her behind. But what this leads to is a very interesting conversation between Carol and Rick.
No, this entire episode is an ongoing conversation between Carol and Rick where she's rationalizing her actions until the end when she stops rationalizing and just says, get over it.
Yeah, and I mean, but this is the thing, like, she basically, her whole thought process behind this is that they were both very sick. She wanted to stop it from spreading, so she basically took their fates into her hands and in her mind was protecting the rest of the population, which clearly did not work. And that's the one kind of mystery to me because they weren't the only people that were sick, clearly. So justifying this seemed a little strange to me. But, or at least that wasn't my impression that they were the only people that were sick at that point. And then Rick just keeps giving her the crazy eye look that we used to see from Dale.
Yeah. Yeah, his is a little more toned down than Dale's crazy eyebrows. Yeah.
Yeah. um, but and we see more and more just her very matter of fact way. Like she has gone from the person that we saw in the first season, which was somebody that had been abused, was very helpless, definitely not taking action with anything, just kind of letting things happen to her, to now being this active participant and making judgment calls. And they're pretty black and white judgment calls. And even as she's talking to Rick, I can't completely blame her, and I think that's the interesting part of this character. I don't necessarily agree with her, but I can also see how she got there,
Yeah. Oh,
to
yeah,
where
it's
she's taking these actions, even though they were super brutal and terrifying.
you
But
just wish she had a little more compassion, but I guess
right,
you also are at the same time you wonder is there room for that and where they are, you know.
right, and and we see this unfold throughout the episode with the scenes with Carol and Rick. So they go to this little town, and they're kind of going through just random houses looking for different supplies, and they I mean, this is the one. I don't want to call it like it's a little bit, there is a little bit of levity here, which makes sort of the things that happen during the supply run as make the actions that happen a little bit more brutal. But they come into this house, they kill off a walker, and then come upon these two survivors. And it's not clear to me, both of the survivors, they seem a little out there. Like, one, they just don't seem to be making too much sense, and maybe they're a little bit crazy. But Sam and
The Penguin.
Anna, what?
The Penguin.
Yes, the penguin.
Sam is the actor plays the Penguin on Gotham.
Yeah, and Anna, and they're basically when Rick and Carol come upon them, they just kind of come out after they killed the walker, and they've been locked up in this room and eating fruit off of a tree, and they don't seem entirely with it, but their interactions with Rick and Carol are pretty comical because it's just sort of like very matter of fact. And they were like, "Oh, thanks for killing off that person," and Rick's like, "It was just one."
You had guns and knives. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like, and they're like the anti-survivors, honestly. And yeah, well, that theme kind of plays itself out over the course of the episode.
Right, but I do think it gives a nice contrast to the survivors that Rick and Carol have become. That there's
Right.
still these people out there that understand that they are not great at surviving, so their method of surviving is avoiding at all costs the walkers.
Yeah. I mean,
Like
yeah.
like when Sam says, "Oh, what were we supposed to do? Knife it in the head?" And Rick's like, "Yeah." Like, it's just really and then they admit that they don't have that many bullets, and it usually takes them 7 or 8 rounds to kill one. So it
Yeah.
does make you wonder how they survived up until this point, really.
Hmm.
But it is an interesting little scene between them, and that just leads to a lot of Carol's questionable behavior. She's just very cold, just a matter of fact in how she deals with them. And Rick's much more protective, like, because clearly he understands that these two are not really meant to be out in the world of walkers.
Well, this is part of his. This is part of his mentality that goes beyond the season too. Because with Alexandria, he's also he kind of has this weird. At least the writers have given him this weird switch in his head where he's like, either you can handle it or you can't.
Right.
And he puts these two definitely in the camp of can't handle it, have to hold their hands. But Carol persuades them to, and they want to help, but Carol is like, yeah, you guys should just go around and look for medicine with us, or not with us, but by yourselves, and then we'll
Mm-hmm.
meet back here, and we all see how that ends.
Yeah. And it doesn't end well. And it ends pretty quickly. And again, it makes you wonder how they survived at all. So that's kind of interesting. Um, and and that leads to the culmination and the last discussion for the majority of the season between Rick and Carol.
Yeah, but before we get there, we've got Daryl and the gang get to the well, they have their little garage thing, which is a nice little vignette in a way. It shows another group of well, quote unquote survivors. They're not zombies, but they
Right.
basically told or shown through the photos on the wall, really, and the fact that some of them had killed themselves by drinking antifreeze.
Right.
It shows a little story of these people. Maybe the tree fell on their garage after, and they were all stuck there. But either way, I think one of them, probably the guy with the weird hair and the beard, turned first, and they tied
Yeah.
him up because it looked like he had ropes around him. This is just a really nice. It wasn't completely clear, but it was a nice example of showing, not telling,
Right.
where we could put it together in our heads that this tight knit little group of employees or family who ran this garage um, basically took a different way out than other quote unquote survivors, and ended up being a little tight knit family of zombies inside a garage.
Right.
I just enjoyed that. I thought that was nice imagery.
I did. I also kind of liked because the vines have overgrown the garage, and the way that the walkers are coming out of it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that was cool.
So that was kind of cool. But again, we see Tyrese being super weird.
Yeah, not Tyrese is just being a jerk, but then Daryl is also like, and Bob have an interesting interaction again about these people in the because Daryl's like, oh, these idiots drank antifreeze, they took the easy way out, holding hands, singing "Kumbaya," and Bob's like, well, they had a pretty horrible choice in front of them, and they took one branch. The rest of us have taken a different one. Bob obviously has his own problems because he has a hard time facing reality without drinking.
Which is tough in this world since alcohol is kind of hard to come by.
Hard to come by, and I can't imagine like when he's by himself. He's telling the story to Daryl that he's had two groups and he's been the only survivor
Right.
twice, and so he when he was by himself, he would drink just to sleep through the night. I'm like, I mean, maybe that's the only way to do it. Like, just hope a zombie comes along when you're passed out from alcohol.
Maybe, but how he survived to this point is also, to me, in
Again,
question.
this question keeps coming up in this episode. How did these people survive up to this point?
Right. So he confesses all this to Daryl. Daryl's like, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. And, and then they manage to go to the college. And it's interesting because this college has a lot of medicine.
Yeah.
And I think,
What's a
they're,
veterinary school?
yeah, but still you would think that it would have been rated a little bit earlier than this. But they find a lot of the medicine. And this is the part of the episode where I don't fully understand because we see Bob putting medicine in his bag.
Do we?
I think so. Or
We
at
see him
least it's
putting medicine in
implied.
a bag, and then I think Michonne picks up that bag.
Oh, maybe that's what I got confused about. But in any case, they get, they get a lot of the medicine, which is fantastic. And then they unfortunately get a little blocked in by walkers that are in the college. And Bob, during the escape, Bob is like almost overcome and his bag's hanging down and he won't let go of the bag. And then the group rescues him thinking they probably thought there was medicine in the bag. And in fact, it's a bottle of alcohol. And Daryl gets all crazy.
He gets so weird. Like, yeah, I don't know. Norman Reedus's interpretation of threatening behavior is like, look like you're gonna make out with the person.
Yeah, he does look a little like that, which is a little disconcerting.
It's disconcerting. He's like thrusting with his pelvis into Bob, and his face is on Bob's face. I'm like, I've seen this before somewhere. Oh wait, yeah, dance floors. He's doing the lambada.
It's totally the lambada, and it's super weird.
It's very strange. But Bob is understandably very uncomfortable by this display of something. I'm not sure what it is. Did you also notice that almost all, well, yeah, they mentioned it in the episode, a lot of, if not all of the zombies in the veterinary building are probably recently turned from the sickness.
Right. And they're showing like the blood out of the eyes and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, this was until recently like a survivor enclave somehow. It may have been even more interesting to have them have to negotiate for the medicine, or maybe that would have taken too long.
Well, but then also, again, you have to question if this is because this is what I was thinking while noticing that they were.
Yeah, these guys had all the medicine.
They had all the medicine, but they haven't gone through it, and
That's
I
a
don't know.
good point. They've got all the medicine, but they still died of the plague.
Yeah, yeah. And I do enjoy the fact that the next vehicle that they find is like this weird minivan.
That was nice. It's not a Hyundai for once.
Yep.
Actually, the
and-
first car they had was like a Camaro or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. Like they're going for the convenience and the comfort of the family vehicle. But then, Daryl and Michonne have this weird little interaction where she's like, Daryl, I'm not going to search for the governor anymore. And he's like, good.
Cool, whatever. I'm over it.
He's kind of like, yeah, whatever. That conversation was so yesterday.
The Lombard has taken all of my interest away.
Mm-hmm.
And then we end with Carol and Rick first talking about they're lost, they're dead, like Lori and Sophia, uh, and how Carol talks a little bit about like how she came about her journey as a character, which is a little interesting because you don't often hear people talking about that
No, not anymore.
in television or in film. Was like, oh yeah, well, I used to be like this, but now I'm like this. Have you noticed?
Right.
But she's kind of attributing her survival skills to being an abused spouse.
Right.
Like she had to set her own shoulders, and and it obviously gave her. It probably had a lot to do with some of her, you know, cold reality perspective. That and losing her daughter, clearly.
Right. And I mean, and I think in some ways Rick is trying to talk her through some of the same experiences that he had had. And just comes to this conclusion that she really shouldn't come back to the prison because if anybody finds out, especially Tyrese, he will kill her. But in addition, Rick then makes this bold statement that he really doesn't trust Carol to be around his own family. Like he kind of says, and then if everybody was dead except you and me, I just don't want you around my kids, And it's interesting because again, I don't necessarily condone the things that Carol has done, but she has done it out of protecting the population as opposed to gone totally psycho and just killing randomly. Like she perhaps took it a very big step too far. But it's interesting that Rick is so unyielding in terms of his judgment of her.
He has to be. I think
know.
something has to happen, and the fact that she's so willing to admit that she did it, it makes that even worse. Maybe if she'd lied to him, it wouldn't have had to come to this.
Well, maybe, but then that just would have sort of put off the inevitable. So in any case,
Certainly wouldn't have made for a great story if we never found out who killed Karen and David. However, yeah, she can't stay there. And
yeah,
I
no,
agree.
he's right. I mean, he's totally right, but she's become an interesting character, so I guess I was pretty sad to see her
Yeah, of course.
go off into the sunset, at least for a little while.
And although she does cry at first when he tells her that she can't come back, she gets over it. She like gives him the watch that her ex-husband or her dead husband had given her, and it's not like a nice gift. She's like, I should have gotten rid of this a long time ago.
Right. And that's also, that's a little bit symbolic, isn't it? Like, she's giving him the watch that her abusive husband gave. Like, it's not exactly.
There's no parallel there. Come on.
But in any case, it's, it's a bittersweet ending. And I actually forgot that they had used the Sharon Van Etten song at the end of this, which is pretty cool. So
yeah, it's a decent song. We also saw Annie, the girl's body getting eaten, and Sam just never showed up. The penguin just never showed up for the rendezvous, so we just assumed that he's dead too. So that glimmer of hope introduced into this episode is kind of dashed.
Yeah, I was actually hoping that one or both of them would just inject a little bit of a difference into this. Mm-hmm. So I was disappointed that they kind of cut that storyline immediately and that they were just
it's a giant downer episode. I mean, we've still got this giant thing of the plague hanging over us.
Right.
We had those two optimistic people apparently destroyed.
Right.
We've got Bob, his fall from grace. Daryl is like being sullen, even when Michonne gives him good news. Like and Tyrese is still pissed off at the world. Like everything is a little bit of we're definitely ending on a down note.
Well, yeah, and I mean I think that's why they chose that particular song. It's called Serpents. It's not a happy song. It's a good song, but it's not happy. But it still makes me want to see what happens going forward.
Sure. Well, this
is still one of my favorite seasons. So.
Oh yeah. I'm just saying, like we've had happier endings.
True.
but yeah, so we'll have the plague episode 5, I guess, coming up next.
Indeed, and we'll see how those antibiotics really work.
Yeah. So I guess we're done with isolation and indifference. Do you get why it's called indifference yet?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Carol was just like part of why Rick makes that decision is Carol is just completely indifferent to the fact that, I mean, when they come across the body of Anna, it's and Anna had some physical difficulty, like her leg was kind of busted.
Yeah.
Um, Carol's just like, oh, okay, too bad, and just starts talking about other things. And then while they're waiting for Sam, Carol's just like, well, you know what? He's not here when he said, and we just need to move on. He's not coming back, and that's just the reality. And she just doesn't show really any remorse because she's really the one that encouraged them to go out and forage, and Rick was against it, and then they both are supposedly dead. So I think that's the indifference, and I also think that we see some of that with Daryl in his reaction to Michonne. So there's all sorts of indifference going on here.
I just think it would have been better to call it something else because it's not quite as simple as indifference, but they do have this I name thing going on with infected, isolation, and indifference, and then the next one we're going to see is internment.
Yeah,
So
I think they're just kind of forcing those I words in
yeah,
there.
I think no remorse or remorseful or remorse or something along those lines would have been more on the nose for this
Yeah,
episode. And,
maybe.
and I think you're right though that part of Rick's decision on how he deals with Carol is her reaction to the way that Anna is taken out and not willing to wait for Sam. I
Right.
think that all plays into his eventual decision. So yeah, interesting episodes.
They are very interesting, but I'm looking forward to talking about the next two with you next time.
Yeah, maybe some more action, but I think it's going to be a little more nursing and doctoring going on. And so when we get together next, we'll talk about episodes 5 and 6 of season 4 of The Walking Dead.
Yep,
And
and if you want to chat about it or have thoughts about these episodes, feel free to send us a tweet, Reanimated PCast on the Twitters.
mm-hmm. And email us reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com, and our website show notes will be at reanimatedpodcast.com shortly.
So until next time, ciao.
Goodbye. Thank you.